1970 and the release of what would go on to become one of the most popular British films of all time.
They're all alike on that estate up there. They'll take your breath if you're not careful.
I haven't taken out of yours yet, ever.
The story of a young boy who has little hope in life.
Casper!
To the outside world, his future looks bleak.
I thought you wanted to leave school. I thought you didn't like school.
I don't mean to say how like work, does it?
But it was during one of Billy Casper's many lonely outdoor adventures that he realised his true passion and talent.
Charlie's round here, I'll get a young and train him.
Would you?
You can't train him.
I'm Steve White, and over this next hour, we'll be hearing the full story from the film's director, Ken Loach, and the main star, Billy Casper himself, actor Dai Bradley. We'll also revisit some of the key locations from the film. To celebrate 50 years since its general release, this is Kes The Inside Story. Kes was released across the UK on the 27th of March 1970. Directed by Ken Loach, produced by Tony Garnett, and starring David Bradley, Freddie Fletcher, Lynn Perry, Colin Welland, and Brian Glover, the film was based on the 1968 book A Kestrel for a Knave, written by Barnsley teacher turned author Barry Hines. I met up with actor David Bradley, known professionally today as Dai Bradley.
Well, we're at actually a church called St. Peter's in Tankersley. This was where Barry's funeral took place and his church service. And we're standing right in front of his grave here. It says, "In loving memory of Barry Hines, an inspirational man born and bred in Hoyland Common." And there's a kestrel hovering just above on the actual tombstone.
Very appropriate. Before A Kestrel for a Knave, tell us about Barry's history and what he was a school teacher, wasn't he?
Yes, he started out at a school called Hoyland Kirkborg and started writing novels. And his first novel was called The Blinder, which was about a young teenager who was somewhat like with George Best's potential. And he gets picked up by Huddersfield Town Football Club, who in the mid-60s were a top-class side. And sadly, he goes down the path of no return, as it were, somewhat like George did. Brilliant skill, genius with the ball at his feet, but his life was destroyed by all of the extra stuff that surrounded him during that time. And Tony Garnett, the producer, came across this book and read it, and Ken Loach was the director.
Director Ken Loach.
Tony had asked Barry to write something for television, and Barry said he needed to finish the book he was working on, and showed it to Tony when it was written, and Tony passed it on to me, and it was A Kestrel for a Knave, and we all thought it would be great to try and make it into a film.
They said, well, why don't you come up to London, meet with us, and we'll collaborate together on the script.
The adaptation from the book to the film film script was really very simple, because the book is very clear, it's very visual, so it was really an editing job.
So the film involved school kids. And I was one of the young lads who ended up at the school that we see in the actual film.
St Helens, isn't it, in Barnsley?
It's sadly no longer there.
Yeah.
But yes, it was St Helens Secondary Modern. And from year one, in actual fact, I was told by my English teacher, who I was pretty close to, that he remembers seeing me in my junior school in a Chinese play that had him in fits of laughter. So I was quite a comedian when I was a kid, but obviously Billy's role was totally the opposite. It completely flipped my kind of character.
I think Billy had comedy in him, though, from your delivery. There was the way you will deliver the most ordinary line was, I don't read dirty books. It was just the comedy timing.
I hope so, because I think he did have comedy in him, and it was the way that he would get around a situation. I mean, I remember Brian Glover in the changing room scenes is asking him why he hasn't got any kit. He says, "I can't afford one, sir." And he says, "Well, buy one." He says, "Well, I haven't got any money. He said, well, get a job. He said, well, I have got a job. He said, well, you should keep out of trouble then, lad. He said, I have, sir, but I haven't been in trouble since last time. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? Well, he hasn't been in trouble since last time. Doesn't make sense last time when, you know.
Dai Bradley was born David Bradley in 1953 in Barnsley, South Yorkshire.
My dad was a coal miner. My mother had worked for a couple who were accountants, and she would take care of their house whenever they came to Barnsley. And we were brought up in an area called Kingston. Later, by the age of 5 or 6, we moved to an area called Athersley, which is literally about 2 miles from St Helens Secondary Modern. So I grew up pretty much like a working class kid, out in the streets every night playing footy, or in those days kick can and sticks we used to play as well. Close pegs kind of arranged like a rugby goalpost, and you threw a ball at it and tried to make the rugby goalposts back, you know, as they should normally be before someone hit you with the ball. And I enjoyed country life, but I was not really as keen as Billy was about birds. But the thing that we had in common was that we shared the same Barnsley accent, and that made it a heck of a lot easier for me.
Was there an ambition to become an actor? Was that in your sights as a child?
Well, according to my sister, I used to take out all her dolls from her bedroom and create street theatre for the kids when I was 10 and 11. Well, I can't remember that, but I think I was interested. Whether or not I'd been a professional actor, I don't know. But it started off at my junior school. So when I arrived at St Helens, our headmaster had announced that for the first time St Helens were going to produce a Christmas pantomime. Anybody who would be interested ought to stay behind and speak with the English teacher. So I read a little scene, and it was hugely successful. So the following year, we decided to put on another pantomime, Hansel and Gretel. And like the similar format to the first year I was at school, I was invited. They said, yes, you don't have to audition now, David.
You've proved yourself.
You've proved yourself. We'll have you as one of the brokers men, so you get more experience. But this time you'll be glockenspiel. So I was Glock and he was Spiel, and it was great fun, and we were becoming more successful than the actual professional panto in town. I mean, we were chock-a-block every night. And I went to see Carousel, that the metalwork teacher and the crafts teacher were playing the leading roles, of which You'll Never Walk Alone comes from. Cool. And at that point, he is dying, having been mortally stabbed, and she is holding him in her arms, singing this incredible song, and I am in total tears. And I know this is what I'd want to do, whether it's as a profession or if it's just as a sideline, as a hobby. But it was at that point in time that the rumour got around that there was going to be a film made in St Helens Secondary Modern School.
It's amazing how the stars align, isn't it? And then
it's extraordinary.
Before we leave where we are now, what are your memories of Barry Hines and him as a person? When did you first meet him?
I met him actually at one of the rehearsals. What happened was that Tony Garnett, Ken Loach, Barry Hines went to 3 different schools, all with lower IQ schools. Kids who hadn't much of a chance in life, who came from tough homes.
Well, second to the script, the casting is the next most important decision you have to make, because then it's a question of who will bring this story to life. Who will the audience believe? If they reveal who they are, they also reveal the character. And one of the big advantages we had, in order to raise the money, we didn't have to give any promise about having a big name actor in this. So we were completely free to find the people who would work best. And then the other significant factor was that we chose to make the film where Barry had been a teacher. And we thought, if the essential premise of the book is true, that is that every child has a talent, then we would find Billy Casper in every school. So we just saw the boys, and one of them was David Bradley.
They saw around 100 kids, maybe, from the 3rd and 4th years, and whittled down the number to around about 30 or so to have a slap-up meal and do a couple of scenes. So we had salmon paste on brown bread. I mean, you know, salmon paste,
yes.
Really, and orange juice, and we read the fight on the coke. So some characters, some kids played McDowell the bully, and others played Billy, and I was one of the young lads that gave it a go at Billy.
Now, whether we were hugely lucky, because David, he was Billy Casper to us. So either we were enormously lucky, or there was somebody with that talent in every school. Well, there's something of the underdog about David. He's absolutely true. I mean, that's the main thing. And he's funny. He believed in what he was doing. And he really carries the film. And he was very good with the birds. And he worked with Barry's brother Richard to train the bird. Everything you asked him to do, he did it, and better than we expected. He was brilliant. He was committed. He was always on time. He was always got a smile on his face.
The authenticity of Kes was heightened by the use of real South Yorkshire locations. The fondly remembered scene in which Billy Casper sits and reads the Desperate Dan cartoon strip was filmed in Blacker Hill, overlooking the old Barrow Colliery coking plant. The setting for the Saturday night working men's club scene, with a band on stage playing 60s hits of the time, was the old Cudworth Hotel, demolished following its closure in 2013. Filming also took place in the villages of Lumwood, Tankersley and Hoyland.
Tell us exactly where we are right now.
We're at the Chippy.
We're at the Chippy.
This is the place that Billy comes to get his fish and chips. Well, actually, chips and fish scraps.
Yeah,
doesn't actually get fish.
Got any scraps, missus?
Just get some scraps.
We're with Dave now. You run the Chippy these days.
Yeah.
How long have you run the Chippy, Sid?
I've had the Chippy 8.5 years.
Is it quite popular?
Yeah, very popular.
But I have a feeling...
The chips, the fish and chips are still to the standard as when you had them.
All right, well, I never sampled the fish.
We do it the old-fashioned way in beef dripping.
But wasn't the chip shop right on the corner? Because if you remember, when you look at the film, and Billy actually takes his chips and fish scraps out, there were 2 windows to the left-hand side of him.
No, if you go outside and look at these windows, they've been bricked up.
So they were the windows?
They were the windows.
So in actual fact, the door's in a different position as well?
The door's the same. If you look at the windows, all 3 of them, that is where they used to be.
Right.
So if you look...
So what happened was Billy came out and he turned out and left and walked past the windows.
Yes.
Because I'm sure that they were on the actual side of, on the road. But then it was this road that we were filming, not the actual main
There'd
road.
be these 2 windows because that was the waiting area.
Right.
Where that window is there was the frying area.
Yeah, the inside of the shop was different. The layout was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. If you come in here, we've still got the old geyser in the corner.
The old what's that?
It's the old geyser. Old gas
boiler.
Gas boiler, yeah. The fryer would be situated along this wall.
That's right. Because I actually have my back to the windows. They were on my side.
They'd be on your side because...
That's right.
That's right.
Because the counter...
I'd have been like this, wouldn't I?
Yeah, the counter used to be somewhere along here.
That's right, so that you'd get the windows on that
Yeah.
side. But the counter would have been further up that way, wouldn't it?
Yeah. There were a wall here, and I think it's been changed sometime in the last 20 years.
And do you find a lot of customers still remember Kes and talk about it occasionally?
Yeah, there's a lot of people, the locals, still talk about it. So that made us start a visitors book. And up to now, that is what we've had.
They've obviously found about it online
They've
and they've tracked it down and
you're getting a lot doing the Kes walk.
There it is, look.
Oh, wow. So that's part of...
There's the old Tankersley Old Hall, which I guess must have been where Billy climbs. And that looks like it might have been the church there, maybe.
This is a what do you call it? It's a map. It's a map. Showcasing where all the locations are for Kes. And it's as part of a Tito magazine. So you can actually do the Kes walk, the Kes scenery walk. Amazing.
We are starting to get a few little bits of memorabilia. Have a print of you holding the kestrel. It's away being framed at the moment. Right. But we are going to put it up in the fish shop. We've also got a painting of the, I think they call it is it the low stand or something? Up across from the church.
Going up the hill?
Going up the hill.
Right.
Everybody thinks it's that one that you got the kestrel from, and it isn't. It's the other one.
The one is just beyond the woods.
Yeah.
Where the farm is.
Tankersley Hall there.
That's right, Tankersley Manor Hall.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
still a nice print.
This isn't a print, it's a painting, this
right.
one. Yeah.
And that would have been opposite the church, wouldn't it? On the other side of the road.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that is. It's got scaffolding up at the moment.
And that's where we shot all of the training sequences for the bird when we were training Kes. Yeah. Where the little dirt track is.
Yeah.
If you walk down that dirt track now, it's got rugby fields in it. But when I was a young lad, it was just an open field.
And of course, it was outside here where you did the scene with the butcher as well, wasn't it?
That was very close to where Billy lived.
Oh, because I know you offer him a chip, don't you?
Yeah, that's just around the corner.
Oh, right, okay.
It's just around the corner.
Well, listen, Dave, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Director Ken Loach first worked as an actor in regional theatre before joining the BBC as a director, contributing to the Wednesday Play series with titles such as Up the Junction, Kathy Come Home and In Two Minds. A real secret to Ken's gritty realism is the casting of non-actors in major roles, as opposed to performers with professional backgrounds.
I think one thing you have to be strict about is that people have to come from where they say they come from. So Freddie Fletcher was just from down the road, who played Judd. All the boys in the school, they were his classmates. So everything was very local. I think that helps, is that people from the area recognise that it's true. You know, you're not trying to pretend that somebody can come up from London and put on a funny voice. I think we just aimed to tell the story truthfully. And that was of a boy, to the rest of the world was a waste of space. But we knew had a talent and a skill and a sensitivity the society could not afford to recognise, because the only job it could offer was semi-skilled or unskilled labour. The complexity of those relationships, and also school, and Barry wrote about school very well, and just have the truth about the school teachers and the brilliant head who believed in corporal punishment but happened to beat the wrong child because he was too stupid to notice what was going on.
The famous scene to which Ken refers is of course the scene in the headmaster's office, where the daily meeting of the Smokers' Union was taking place, with head teacher Mr. Grice. And according to Dai Bradley, it all happened for real.
We were really caned and we went on strike.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We were told that we wouldn't get the cane and that we'd be able to wear padded gloves and that they would just make it look as... And so we'd have to act being hit. Yeah. But Ken shot from the point of view of the boys first, because he wanted to do that sequence and give the headmaster some time to learn his lines, because they were difficult. And he also wanted to get the reaction of the little boy at the end, because he had to do it in one take. Otherwise, if he stopped it, the little boy knows he's going to get hit.
Coming. Yeah.
So he did it in the one take, and then we did it several times afterwards. But after that one take, having been told that we wouldn't be caned, we all said, "Oh no, we're not doing that again. You can take your route. You can chuff off, aye." And about 45 minutes elapsed, and some were having a quick fag on the smokers' corner. I didn't smoke those days. And Tony Garnett had a word with Ken and said, "Well, look, we've still got half a day's shoot to do here. We're wasting time." He said, "Well, you'll have to have a word with them." So Tony came over and he said, "Listen, lads, I know we lied to you about getting the cane, but we had to get your real reaction. And we need to shoot it again. No, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. You can listen. I'll give you 50p for every time you get caned. So we went, all right, okay. So we made about £3.50 extra that day, which was a lot of money in 1968. You know, and we should have been in the Guinness Book of Records as the smallest group and the youngest ever to go on strike, industrial strike. You know.
You're listening to Kes The Inside Story with myself, Steve White, hearing from the film's director, Ken Loach, and the actor who brought Billy Casper to life, Dai Bradley. Both Dai and myself, whilst making this programme, took the opportunity to revisit some of the iconic settings used in the making of Kes. And after leaving the famous chip shop behind in Hoyland, we made the short journey to Black Lane in Tankersley and to the farm known in the film as Monastery Farm and that famous wall.
So this is really the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful journey, both for Barry Hines and how Kes has evolved, and even 50 years on still resonates so much with society and millions of people, but also my life too. This is where my life changed.
Incredibly. And what we're going to do is, once we finish here, we'll visit the location where the family home was. So we'll talk about your relationship with the Caspers and your film family when we get there. But for here, let's talk about your relationship with the kestrel, with Kes. I mean, did you as an actor have to form quite a close bond with that bird?
Yes. What you saw on screen, I'd only been rehearsing for maybe 2 or 3 days. I was always slightly ahead, but not so much that I'd become too professional. They wanted a young kid struggling to understand the way of falconry. So these were some of the very first scenes that we shot, because the kestrel chicks were getting very close to fledging, as it's called, I guess. And we had to ensure that we were able to actually climb up to the nest, which is about 35 feet maybe up on top of the one of the last remaining pillars, and it was in a kind of a crevice, and had to kind of climb up to the top, stick my arm through the opening, the aperture, and grab one of the 3 kestrels that were in there. They probably were the 3 kestrels that we were actually using in the film. And I remember we shot it around about 6 o'clock in the morning, because it was supposed to be quite early. Naturally, it was actually earlier than 6, maybe 4 or 5.
You can see it's quite dark when you watch the film, yeah.
Because in summertime, 6 o'clock and it's very bright. And they wanted it to have the appearance that it was dawn. And I remember the local farmer had laid out something like half a ton of hay. And they said, well, maybe you should just jump into the straw to see how it feels if you fall off. So I was given a hell of a lot of confidence in myself climbing that wall. But I had been doing some climbing exercises at school, because I knew that, as Ken knew, I'd have to have some kind of practice. So when it came to actually scaling the wall, it wasn't so daunting. The actual scene that Ken decided to use was the one when I'd taken the kestrel chick and put it inside my jacket, just at the point that her talons came out and kind of scratched and squeezed on my heart, so you can actually see the impression it gave me in my face. We trained the kestrel in the fields behind Barry's home. That's where the actual filming of Kes, Billy and Mr. Farthing took place, when he's flying the kestrel to the lure. We had 3 kestrels, which in those days they'd named them after a particular shoe shop, Freeman, Hardy and Willis. And I remember Richard trained Freeman, I trained Hardy, and Barry trained Willis. Well, I didn't really train Hardy, but that was the kestrel I mostly worked on. I did some training with Freeman. Sadly, Willis, unfortunately, was quite neurotic, so we had to let her go in the end. We had to reintroduce her back into the wild. And you can see the differences between the two kestrels. During that scene when he's flying the bird to the lure and the English teacher, Mr. Farthing, is watching from a little distance, one of the birds comes at me at eye level, as if it's coming at me like an exocet, whereas the other is almost like hovering above me and diving onto me. So there was two totally different techniques.
Wow.
One of throwing the actual lure or the beanbag directly in front of my eye line, and another was actually throwing it, almost at a 75, 80 degree angle into the sky.
But all filmed in one scene. It's just amazing.
Well, we shot it a couple of times because there were different birds.
Yeah.
Freeman was the one that came at my eyes, and Hardy was the one that would hover and then dive down onto you. So it was quite exciting.
As you stand here now, Dai, looking at that wall 50 years on, what are the memories that come back to you from 50 years ago?
Just pure joy. The warmth and the camaraderie of the unit. We were a family. Yes, we were working, but it didn't seem like work. It was an adventure. It was a journey, which I know for the most part, most people in the film, the cast members, have never forgotten. Some went on to create careers because they were just starting out, like my mother, Lynn Perry,
course, yeah.
Dougie Brown, who played the milkman.
Lynn's brother, wasn't he? Yeah.
That's right. Even Julie Goodyear.
Is she in it?
Yes, she is. She was in the betting office. You don't actually see her face, but you hear her voice. And as Billy walks into the betting office, looking around, not knowing where he wants to go, she actually says to him, "Can I help you, son?" And he says, "No, I'm all right, thanks."
Just the bet that he should have put on that didn't put
That's
on,
right.
which led ultimately to the end scene of the film, which we'll come to. Yeah.
And also there was a really nice man from Liverpool whose surname was Dean, who was the chippy, who went on to Brookside. He went into Brookside, but he started out as a docker,
Right.
and started doing the kind of the comedy circuit. And I can't remember his Christian name, but I have a feeling his surname was Dean, and he was the chippy.
Whilst nobody was showing any interest in Billy Casper at all, there was one character who did spot Billy's potential. That was teacher Mr. Farthing. This is a role that was played by somebody who did have acting experience, having previously played the role of PC David Graham in Z-Cars. Liverpool actor Colin Welland. Director Ken Loach.
Well, Colin was the only experienced actor amongst the cast, and because he knew how to work in front of a camera, I think his experience was helpful to everyone. But he had been a teacher, so he knew how to handle a class. And again, that experience is very important. And there's a warmth about Colin. He's dead now, sadly. There was a warmth about Colin and a generosity of spirit that was important.
It was such a beautiful relationship that they formed, wasn't it? And what Mr. Farthing saw in Billy must have been what was going on in schools up and down the country. Even though it was a hard time, there were kids there that weren't getting on so well in school, but they had all these hidden talents. And if they'd have all had just as one teacher like Mr. Farthing, there's a chance that they could have all...
That was part of the message of Kes, that every young kid at school has something that is unique, and it's about teachers finding the way in through the doorway that unleashes that potential.
And Colin Welland played that so beautifully.
Yes, he discovered in something with Billy. Clearly there are people who will always be consigned to kind of jobs in factories and things, because they don't have that kind of aspiration to do anything other than have a good time, enjoy a drink with their mates, settle down and have a family. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there are also kids there that are misunderstood, not because that they're unintelligent, but because they're not able to communicate their needs. And what wonderful Colin, Mr. Farthing, was able to do was, with Billy and with the other kids, but specifically with Billy, he saw something when Billy talks about the kestrel in front of the classroom, that there was something unique about this kid, and that he did have something to offer, and that, okay, he couldn't read and he couldn't write, and in actual fact he had to force himself to read the book on falconry, which you see Billy actually using his finger across the lines in the actual the book itself to understand the words. It was a wonderful relationship, contrasting that with, like, say, Brian Glover.
Brian Glover was born in Sheffield and raised in Barnsley, attending Barnsley Grammar School. While studying at Sheffield University, he subsided his student grant by performing as a professional wrestler. He later became a teacher at the same Barnsley Grammar School at which he'd been a pupil, when the offer came to play one of the most memorable characters of Kes, PE teacher Mr. Sugden.
He's a bigger kid than all the other kids put together, and Brian Glover absolutely got the humour of that without overplaying it.
When you think about it, it's very cruel. Some teachers, somewhat like Judd, Billy's stepbrother, or half-brother, I should say, the way that you kind of bring your young sibling up is by not punishing them, but making them tough. You don't show kindness or understanding. You batter them around, and that's what Brian was about. He was in your face, enjoyed a laugh, liked to be centre of attention, hence the reason why he played Bobby Charlton, or the slightly balding fair Bobby Charlton, the referee, the commentator, the penalty taker. I mean, you know, there was nothing that this character could not do.
There's a great subtlety of that scene, and I don't think it's your character that says it, but you just hear someone off camera and they just go, "Downhill again."
That's right, because there are little moments that were not scripted. They just actually happened on that particular scene or that take.
And also the boys who were playing just entered into it, really. And didn't take long to shoot. It might have been a day and a half, something like that. It was good fun. I mean, some of the comedy came in when we were filming it, and some of it's in Barry's book.
And then the form teacher, who's trying his best to be an upstanding master, but is kind of lost at sea, you know. So that I kind of reevaluated the film in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of the film is about the relationships that we all have, and that's what I think also reflects in our lives. Just think about the relationships that Billy had that had real warmth and depth. The butcher, it's just a tiny little scene, but in that tiny little scene you know that they have a really warm relationship. In the town centre, when the old man stops and sees the little boy with a kestrel on his arm, there's that moment where they connect. So I think a lot of the film, same with the milkman. Sure, Billy likes the odd bottle of orange without paying for it, and, you know, maybe half a dozen eggs, but that was part of, you know, growing up, really. A lot of kids were like that.
But they got the rapport, haven't they?
Yes, and it's also the negative relationship between Billy and Judd, or McDowell. So all the film, as well as about society, the education system, the domestic situation as well, it's also about the interrelationships that we all develop in our lives. He had this wonderful lackadaisical wonder. He'd be walking, which is what I tend to do, and suddenly he'd see something and he'd stop. And he'd just look at it and watch it, as if he's kind of like studying it for some kind of thesis. I remember only a couple of years ago now, I was walking down to the local supermarket, and I have to go through quite a nice little section of country fields. And as I was approaching the supermarket, I saw two buzzards, actually in courtship. And what they do is they entangle their talons and then start to free fall. And what is happening is it's the female that is actually testing the strength of the male suitor to see if he's actually up for being a dad. And they'd split off about 50 feet from the ground, and then they'd circle back up and do it all over again. And I'm seeing this and I'm amazed by it, whereas everybody else is tapping phones and looking at the internet. And I think, is this what the world's coming to in a lot of ways? That an electronic device is more important than what's happening around you.
And if Billy was around today at that age, do you think he wouldn't have been taken in by all the digital technology? Do you think wildlife would have still been his
I think he would.
passion?
I think he would. I think he'd probably have a mobile phone, but he wouldn't be. He wouldn't have a kind of a. He wouldn't be addicted to it. I think he'd also probably have a laptop or a computer, because today you can't really kind of get on without some form of electronic device to get online. But I don't think he would be kind of hooked to it. If he did use it, it would be to discover, because as we know, very, very early on in the film, he actually calls out Fisher, to which Billy says German bite. You know, and where the hell did he get that from? Well, Billy listens to the radio for weather forecast, the shipping forecast, right? So he had a wandering kind of mind, a wandering soul, and he liked the names, and he must have wondered where they were on the map and what the countryside was like. So I think that there would still have been a connection with the countryside and Billy, yeah.
Shall we go and visit the family home?
All right, shall we?
Let's go and see.
Okay. This is Parkside Road, where Billy and Judd and his mum, Mrs. Casper, used to live. Billy and Judd sharing the same bedroom, which was not comfortable, as you can imagine. It was not really a double bed. It was a large single.
And it was in that garden there. I mean, we're not going to reveal the number just in case you have the privacy of the residents, but the garden we're looking at now that's where the shed was.
That's right. It was in the back garden. There was a little tool shed, and also another shed that Billy had created, a little raptor centre. They're called raptor centres. Yeah. And that's where he kept his bird on a tree branch.
Let's talk about the relationship with the family then, because you touched on it earlier on. There was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of shoving and pushing going on. Let's talk about the relationship with Judd first of all. Was there any love there between Judd and Billy, do you think?
I guess there must be some form of bond, but I think because one of the things that Barry always said is he always thought that maybe he'd just written Judd a little bit too strong, made him a bit too much of a bully. But from what I gather from the fans, it was very authentic. It was very real to them, and there isn't a great deal of affection shown between Billy and Judd, and it's his in the 60s and early 70s. It was the way that one's elder brothers and sometimes sisters would kind of make a character out of you, build your character up by being hard. I mean, it seems cruel, and it is, that there must be a better way than introducing people into the outside world, than beating them every odd day And that was the kind of relationship that he had with Billy. I remember during the actual shooting it that Freddie, who was quite a kind of a, well, he thought he was the God's gift to women, actually.
Really?
Oh, yes.
As Freddie Fletcher.
He had no trouble pulling birds. And so when we shot the... and we'd had a kind of a... He was several years older than I was. And when you're young, 7 or 8 years is like half a generation to a kid. So we didn't really form a friendship during the film, but we got on fine. But there were occasions when, things were, I remember he cracked me across the head a couple of times. And when he comes back from the Saturday evening out, and I'm asked to take his trousers off, quite a lot of coins dropped out as I pulled them down. So on one take, I'd actually put several coins in my pocket without him knowing, of course. Right. So he must have been 5 bob short that day.
And of course, that's the scene where you got one back on him.
That's
as well,
right.
wasn't it?
I mean, I don't know if Barry was truly aware of it, but I think probably Judd was actually born out of wedlock, so he's actually taunting him.
Yeah.
So you can tell that there's animosity between them. So I wonder if in actual fact what had happened was that Judd had been born out of wedlock when she was in like late teens or something like that.
Because we know they had different dads, didn't we?
We know they had different dads.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The role of Mrs. Casper, Billy's mum, was played by a singer and comedy performer already well known in South Yorkshire clubs, Rotherham's Lynn Perry. She'd later find fame, of course, as Ivy Tilsley in Coronation Street.
She was a wonderful woman, very, very funny, very off the cuff. I'd seen her several times before her passing, and very warm, very friendly. That was the whole thing, including my schoolmates. Everybody was just one great big family. And even the couple who owned this home here before they died, they were salt of the earth.
The conclusion of Kes differed from a lot of films made then and now, in that there was never any discussion of the film having a happy ending.
Billy's future is bleak. So the end of the story has to be the death of the bird, because it is the end of that kind of aspiration that Billy had.
They tried to convince Ken and Barry, and Tony of course, to change the ending, because they wanted a happy ending whereby Billy would have worked in a zoo. Well, I don't think we'd be talking about Kes now if that was the conclusion, the denouement.
Yeah.
It had to have what's known as a blue ending, a minor ending, so that people questioned and thought about what they'd seen.
There's a section in the book at the end where Billy walks through town, and it works very well in the book, but we thought it would weaken the end of the film, and at the end of the film is when Kes is killed. Actually, shooting it was quite interesting because I didn't want David to know that the bird was dead. The scene before he finds him dead is a row with Judd where Billy's failed to put on a bet for Judd, and Judd is so angry that he kills the bird. And I didn't want David to know that when he was looking for it.
I walked down towards the shed, expecting to see the 2 kestrels, and there was only one there. And I looked towards Barry and Richard, and they were really somber-faced. They said, "You'll have to train Freeman today, but don't worry about it. We'll just go through the ropes, just to keep you in case we have to reshoot something." And I was really angry that they would do such a horrible thing to a beautiful bird.
So we obviously didn't kill one of the birds.
Director Ken Loach.
So we had to get a kestrel that had died from natural causes. And when we got to the point where he had to discover it in the dustbin, he found it was dead.
So I went the following morning to shoot the scene, and the whole atmosphere on set had changed. No one was talking to me, whereas through the entire film, everybody's warm and friendly, having jokes, you know.
Let's remember how old you were at the time.
I was 14 and a half. And this went through the whole cast and crew. The crew were always kind of chatting with me and keeping me busy and bubbly and things. But Ken had asked them not to talk to me. And he wanted to create a distance, so I'd felt alienated, and I can understand why. You know, it's genius when you think about it. And the property man went to the fridge, brought out this newspaper. It was a ball of newspaper, and he said, "I thought you'd best see it before I put it in the dustbin, David." And I said, okay. I knew it was going to be a kestrel, and it was like fish and chip newspaper. It's the kind of newspaper you'd discard the following day. And there she was, lying limp, her head cocked to one side, on her chest, on her breast. And it looked so like Hardy. I couldn't tell any difference. But I felt so angry with them and bitter that they'd been so cruel to something that had been the focus of the whole film for me. So we shot the scene, and they did things to make me even more unsettled inside. The cafeteria that we had a canteen truck, and whenever we did any really important days, he would always have my favourite meal on for lunch, which was shepherd's pie, an apple crumble or rhubarb crumble and custard. And on that day, he sold out. They didn't actually keep me a portion. And I thought, they're doing this on purpose. They're trying to upset me. Well, bugger, I'm going to the nearest shop and I'm going to pig out on all the fruit that I can find. So I went to the nearest shop, which was literally about 100 yards away during lunchtime. And I started choosing all my favourite fruits, and fruits I never heard of before, and cherries and my favourite black grapes. And then by the time I got back to set, I said to myself, you can't ruin a film because of the way that they're treating you in this last day. You've got to play Billy now, David. You can't not play Billy. So you have to let yourself go. You have to go with the feeling of what you feel about your beloved Kestrel being killed. So it was all part of the process. And after we shot the film, Ken said to me, you have to go up and shoot with and train with Freeman now, David, like every night, weekday night, just to keep you in spec in case we have to do any reshoots. So I went back up to Barry's house, which is literally about half a mile away from here, and they were waiting for me, and they were in the bedroom, so I had to go up the stairs, and I went up to the first floor and opened the door, and there on a branch was Hardy. Wow. And she was so excited to see me, because whenever she saw me, she knew she was going to get fed. I turned to them and said, "You buggers!" And they said, "Well, we were lucky. We were able to find a bird that had died in Scotland, and we were able to bring it down to Barnsley and use that."
It was United Artists who made it, so they didn't expect much, but when they did see it, because the South Yorkshire Barnsley dialect is quite strong, the two people who saw it said they understood Hungarian better. So they didn't know what to do with it, and in the end, it sort of attracted some interest, and there were two critics who really fought for it. One was Derek Malcolm in The Guardian, and one was Nina Hibben. And they're both brilliant, and because of them, it went to a festival or two, and then it opened in London. So it just went on a limited release, but it's just kept going.
When you look back, does that film still mean a lot? I mean, I think I know the answer from listening to how you've spoken today, but does that film still have a massive place in your heart?
I can't leave it. I mean, it's
that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think I always knew when Kes came out, and it had such an amazing reaction from the press and the peers, that probably I would never be able to emulate that kind of character again. That from there on in, it would be downhill.
Did you want to be an actor? By that point?
It was at that point when I saw the power of what movie making can do. Because I know that Kes has changed lives. I met the secretary of the British Falconry Association about 5 years ago. And he said, "Do you know what you're responsible for?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, before Kes came out, there were around about 700-800 members of the British Falconry Association. 35 years on or so, we now have 29,000 members. And it had to happen because after the film came out, kids were stealing kestrels from the nest, wanting to be like Billy.
Yeah.
So kestrels at one point became quite endangered. And of course it's inspired people who are in the movies and on TV. Chris Packham, he has a kestrel or had a kestrel when he was a youngster. So I think the film has had a really positive impact in society.
And what about your career as an actor? Are you still acting today? Have you managed to carry on and almost leave Billy behind and take on other roles?
To some extent, I've had highs and lows as everyone do. I've also realised that one's life is more important than one's professional life. So I've always tried to keep things in perspective, and I'm still acting, although being an elderly person at the age of 65, although in Japan that's the new 40 apparently. I don't mind being a new 40. I have a wonderful agent who I adore. He's a very warm and friendly person who actually has acting schools up and down the country too. So every now and again you might see me on TV.
Am I right in thinking you almost got a part in Our Vida Same Pet?
That's right. I think it was down to two people, me and Kevin Waitley, and they went with Kevin. I think Kevin was from Newcastle, and Our Vida Same Pet was actually set in Newcastle. So I was rather disadvantaged there. But I can understand he was wonderful.
So you almost became Neville.
Yes. Well, it would have been nice to have had a guest part in it at some point, wouldn't it? But then I did the World Cup of Captain's Tale, which was set in Newcastle.
That was with Tim Healy.
With Tim Healy, Dennis Waterman too. And that was a wonderful experience about Bishop Auckland representing England in the 1910 World Cup final and winning it.
It's amazing. It's an amazingly made film. Was that Ken as well? Was that Ken?
No,
Loach?
that was Dennis Waterman was executive producer.
Was he exec producer on that?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I think Kes is a moment I look back on with huge affection. I look back primarily for Barry, who was a wonderful writer and a very funny man and a very generous man again. So primarily, and it's his genius that has the central image of the boy whose life is bound to the earth and the bird that soars free. I mean, every film you do is memorable, but that one's memorable for many reasons.
I mean, so many movies these days you actually sit in front of the TV and you know, it's over and you forget about it. But, to say that after 51 years now since we actually filmed it, that Kes is still part of people's lives and memories as we discover. Coming here, 3 people beat me in the car and shout, "Oi, Casper!" I get this all the time. I do.
So, do you still have that Barnsley accent in you? It's just
I do
come out there.
I do when I get angry.
Well, listen, Dai, it's been absolutely fantastic catching up with you today. Thank you for sharing your memories of Kes with me, liaison.
It's been a pleasure.
I'm Steve White, and you've been listening to Kes The Inside Story, featuring director Ken Loach and actor Dai Bradley for BBC Radio Sheffield.